Well, hello. Glad you could be with us. We are getting started on our Friday night Bible study, and we will be continuing in the book of Genesis. We're prepared, I believe, for chapter 20. Anyway, it's going to be the story of Abraham and Abimelech, and that's going to be a very important story as it helps to set a foundation for much of what happens throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Of course, all the book of the Genesis is there essentially to set that foundation. But there are some key aspects of the story that get generally misunderstood later on that we really need to get out of this part of the story. The news in this area has been rather tragic this week. I won't go into it because it would give away our location. But those of you who know where we live know what's been happening nearby. And it's made kind of a big deal with Second Amendment proponents. So that's probably enough said on that line. When I have them, I like to read my answers to Bible questions for an online Bible information site that I volunteer with. And after we finished recording our session last week, I got a question from them. And then again, early this morning sometime, I got a question from them. So I'm going to read both questions and answers. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and start that now. And then there's some other things we might talk about. First question comes from someone named Smokey Phillips. Hello, my name is Smokey. I've grown up in the SDA church and have a pretty good understanding of things. Of course, I still have a lot to learn as well. I know that some answers don't always come right when we want them. Sometimes we're not ready to hear things. But I've been wondering about the whole creating Lucifer, if he was going to do what he did question. I know God doesn't want just robots, slaves, and God is fair in punishments, even with Satan. I've listened to a certain person on this subject many times, but I just wondered, though, and I think he meant wondered, why didn't God wait until Lucifer's punishment was dealt with and over before he created mankind? I've been trying to think of God's character and I can't come up with an answer. And I thought when I printed this out to give it to my wife that I had printed that question, and I was pretty sure that there was something in there that would trigger her. And it didn't happen, and she's asking me what's going on here. And then I realized when I printed it, I had selected just the answer part to paste into the website where I do the answers. And so without me noticing it, the software decided, oh, he only wants to print what he's got selected, so we're only going to print that. So it didn't print the question, and she didn't get to read the question. Anyway.
But when I heard who so-and-so was,
Yeah.
all you said was, well, I've been listening to so-and-so, and that got your reaction.
Yeah. Dear Smokey, thank you for visiting and for submitting your question about the timing of Earth's creation. Our mission and the reason for our name is to answer questions based on the text of the Holy Bible and not on other writings. And we do have to point this out from on occasion when we're dealing with Adventists who write to the site because they think we're going to give them answers from somebody else. And we don't do that. That's part of our instructions that we're not to do that. What?
We're so brainwashed by her that we can't always differentiate between her and the Bible.
Yeah.
And I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
How long ago did I leave the church?
Now, does the Bible say this, or is that an Ellen thing? Yeah, you run into that on occasion. At any rate, the Bible isn't explicit on the timing between the fall of Lucifer, Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, see also Daniel 8:10, and the start of creation. Evidence hidden in the language of Genesis 1:2 suggests that the origin of sin in heaven preceded the creative act described in Genesis 1. The suggestion in the Hebrew words used in Genesis 1:2 that the Spirit was on earth contending with rebellious agents may support the assertion that Satan's discontent had to do with the planning sessions for creating the human race. And that bit is an Ellen thing. And a lot of times what Ellen wrote was based on what was largely believed in the Christian community at the time that she wrote it. So it's likely that there was a belief out there that the councils in heaven about the creation of this world helped to spark Lucifer's rebellion. You won't find that explicitly in the Bible, though. That's just supposition. He and the angels who sided with him may have come to this planet seeking to interfere with God's plans. Now, there's another theory that I'll discuss here. I didn't really get it included in this answer. I guess I was still a little sleepy and foggy when I wrote the answer. It didn't rise to mind. There is a theory out there that God created this world specifically to deal with the lies that Satan had been telling. And this theory holds that God's plan would have worked whether we fell into sin or not. So we didn't have to fall into sin for God to be able to use the creation of this planet as a demonstration of the lies about him. But when we did fall into sin, then that very event would serve to counter the lies that this rebellious angel had been telling. You question why God would go ahead with his plans for the human race, knowing the possibility that the fallen angel, the serpent, would convince the humans to believe his lies about God's character and thus plunge the species and billions of individuals into suffering. Why risk it? As you say, why not wait until the natural results of Satan's action resulted in his death? The Bible doesn't directly address the issue, so we're left to theories informed by our knowledge of God's nonviolent, unconditional love. If God refused to use force to prevent the fall of angels who lived close to him, and if he wanted to inoculate the universe against future rebellion, he would have to demonstrate the falsehood of the lies against him by non-coercive means. Also, should God's compassion allow a disruption in heaven to sidetrack his plans? Or should he demonstrate divine independence by carrying out his plans despite the attempts of a rebel to disrupt them? In other words, should God allow his creatures to control the Creator? And I'm not reading off this now, I'm just commenting. And I would like also to comment here on this whole idea that somehow it reflects on God that he created Satan when he knew Satan was going to rebel. Of course, there are those who want to hold the position, well, no, God didn't know Satan was going to rebel. He only knew it was a possibility. And he didn't know who it would be. Suggesting that God's omniscience is limited to time as we experience it. And I think we've discussed that in the group before. My personal belief is God is not limited by time as we are. So his knowledge of the future is the same as our knowledge of the past. He knows what will happen because he was there when it happened. And that's a little awkward because we're so limited in time. It's hard for us to imagine someone who is not limited by time. And that, I believe, is probably a prerogative of divinity alone and not of any created being. At any rate, another oddity of the human experience is that when we have been harmed and wronged, we seem to lose reason and to be out for blood wherever we can find it. And so we want to hold everyone that we imagine had a part in harming us accountable for what they've done, and we want them punished. And for that reason, when enemies of the United States manage to pull off an attack on our soil, there are those who will blame the government. Well, you should have been paying attention to what was going on. You should have stopped it. Blame the person who didn't stop it. And I think very often people will do that with the Creator. They will expect the Creator to make good what someone else has done because, quotes, he could have stopped it. That's a very human approach to things.
That's kind of how Seinfeld ended.
You want to explain that?
The four of them went on vacation,
Right.
and while they were on vacation, they witnessed somebody getting mugged.
And they filmed it and talked about it and didn't go help.
Right.
And they were
And
brought in.
And they went to prison over it.
Yeah, they went to prison over not moving in to stop something. Yeah. That's a very human reaction. But what that does is it denies personal responsibility. And we have discussed here in this group that there are two elements to the principle of love. The first is freedom of the individual. God didn't create us to be controlled by somebody else. He created us to be self-controlled and thus to be free of any external control. And then the second one is personal responsibility. You own up to and you accept the consequences of your choices. So,
yeah, you may not be responsible in every situation for something that you do. Despite that, you have to pay the consequences.
yeah.
Example would be if you take a medication that changes your personality, takes away your inhibitions, and you go out and do something that you wouldn't normally do. How about if you get drunk and you go out and drive and harm someone? You're not responsible for the behavior that the alcohol gave you, but you are you are responsible for having imbibed, and you have to pay the consequences.
Mm-hmm. Well, knowing that someone died because of your poor choices is in and of itself a serious consequence, and you have to live with that.
I personally know of 3 different people who just all of a sudden exhibited passed through, two of them ended up in prison. And it was, what they did was just totally out of their character. And when I heard about it, I asked the people, do they happen to be taking an antidepressant? The answer was yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the antidepressant was very likely the cause of the behavior change. However, the person who did the act still has to pay the price.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go on in this question. I've got more to say on that, but we'll get to that after the question.
Yeah, I have more to say on this Ellen White framework too.
Here's another complication. In Genesis 2:17, the Hebrew word yom expressed when the man would die if he ate the forbidden fruit. Yom appeared previously in chapter 1 to delineate the time period required for each creative act described, and is linked to evening and morning. Did God lie when he warned the man about the tree, or did something else happen? God knew that believing the serpent's lie would lead to separation between creator and creature. Since the creator gives life, separation brings death. Some have suggested that the man's 930 years of life after that separation means God provided a special extra-natural system of life support to allow humans to choose the healing he offers. If that is so for the man, would it not also be true for Satan? That would make the events at the cross astonishing indeed. As humans, driven by Satan himself, worked to erase the life of his Son, God acted intentionally to sustain the lives not only of the humans carrying out the awful deed, but of the angels spurring them on to do it. We haven't the moral or emotional capability to understand how God could do such a thing. But if God willingly endured this whole mess, he must have seen a worthwhile outcome that would result. Maybe God saw that the end for humanity would be better if we experienced this mess and subjected us to it in the hope of that future. Quoting from the Bible now, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." 2 Corinthians 4:16-18. God left the choice to the humans he created, but his rescue plan more than made up for the loss humanity would suffer if we did fall. Please don't take that to mean that God planned for us to fall, or that the fall was necessary for humanity to reach its full potential. The choice to believe the serpent's lies about God's character rested with us, and I imagine God had plenty of good things planned for an unfallen species. Okay, I didn't really answer your question, but maybe I've given you some perspectives on why God didn't hold up creating just because of Satan's rebellion. I tend to believe that redeemed humans will serve as the inoculation against a repeat of sin hinted at in Nahum 1:9. That's the text that says that affliction would not rise a second time. We'll have eternity to seek out answers we did not have the time, background information, or moral and emotional capacity to find in the finite time allotted to us here. I suppose you could always ask again and see if someone else gives you a different perspective. May God bless and give you ever clearer views of his loving and trustworthy character. Sincerely, blah, 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 blah.
I had a thought when you read that.
And that thought was?
I think this is actually an Ellen thing. I know I've heard it taught by a pastor.
Yeah.
I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure I've read it in one of Ellen's writings. And that is that the unfallen angels are wary about having somebody in the heavenly realm after having gone through what we've gone through here on this earth, because they fear that we might contaminate them, and they don't want to be contaminated.
That makes those angels out to be selfish, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It shows that those angels are fallen.
They do not perfectly love because perfect love casts out fear.
They are interested in saving themselves.
Well, the other thing I wanted to say about that was, and let me temporarily go to a different view here so you can see the picture I keep on the desktop of this computer. There it is. Somebody actually made this bumper sticker and somebody else got a picture of it. Obey gravity. It's the law. And we put that up there because we hold here that God's moral law is just as natural as are the physical laws that govern the operation of the universe. And ultimately, it is not possible to break physical law. It is possible to live out of harmony with natural law. So, and let's use this example because you made me think of it a little bit earlier. Let's suppose through no fault of your own, somebody throws you out of the 54th floor window of a skyscraper. Will you break the law of gravity?
No.
No, you won't break the law of gravity. Are you out of harmony with the law of gravity at that point?
Yes.
No. And you will suffer a consequence. All right? And I gave that example because once you are out of harmony with natural law, you suffer the consequence, and fault doesn't enter the picture. So, yes, it may have been Satan's fault that he lied to the humans and got them to believe it. But in the end, who suffered the consequence of believing Satan's lies and ending up getting losing the love-trust relationship with the Creator that they had up until they believed those lies? Well, the humans who believed the lies suffered those consequences. Because whatever the fault, they were now out of harmony with God's moral law. They couldn't break it any more than you can, quotes, break the law of gravity. And by the way, when an airplane flies over your head, it is not breaking the law of gravity. Because when the power runs out and it quits being pulled through the air, it comes to the ground. Now, hopefully it does so in a controlled manner called a landing at an airport so that nobody's injured in the process. But what's going on is that the forces of the Bernoulli principle of the pressure differential on the wings of the aircraft are providing a force opposite to the force of gravity. The force of gravity is still in operation, but this other opposite force is also in effect, and that's how we're able to fly. Anyway, I had another one. This one I answered early this morning.
I wanted to say something about what I said earlier about us being so indoctrinated in Ellen. We don't always know the difference between what's an Ellenism or if it's from the Bible. There is a group out there. They are former Seventh-day Adventists. They have a presence on Facebook. And they found me, and this has been a while. They found me and added me to their group without asking me. Well, I'm a former Seventh-day Adventist, so I hung around there for a little while and chatted with them and everything. I ended up leaving that group because I found that they essentially have the same problem that I have with the Adventist Church, and that is the law lens that they look through. They still believe that God operates his creation through the lens of the human law construct.
Yeah.
I don't do that.
Imposed law.
Yeah. While I was in that, I don't want to say I was in that group. I never really fully accepted them, but I did eventually. I did sometimes talk with them and join in, and for the most part, they're nice people. There was a conversation that came up between some of the people. They were worrying about the teaching that before God comes, all of our sins will be made known to everybody. We will have to answer for everything we've ever done, and everybody will know what we've done. And the people were getting worried about it, and I spoke up and I said, this is an Ellen teaching. Why are you worrying about it? It's not in the Bible. And you know what they did?
What?
They agreed to have me and started blessing me with 4-letter words.
Yeah.
That teaching is not in the Bible, people.
No.
And humiliation is not an act of love. And if it's not an act of love, it's not something that God's going to do to you.
Yeah. Well, let me go on to this other question here. And this is from someone named Joe. 1 day equals Monday. 2 days equals Tuesday. Not sure about Wed and Thurs. 5 day equals Friday. 6 and 7. The two S's make Saturday the 6th day and Sunday the 7th day, which is the Sabbath day. This all adds up logically, right?
And my response,
Dear Joe, thank you for submitting your question about weekdays.
I'm sure it makes sense.
The day names we use come from Roman usages. Sunday, Sun's Day. Monday, Moon's Day. Tuesday, Tyr's Day. T-Y-R. Wednesday, Woden's or Odin's Day. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Freya's Day. Saturday, Saturn's Day. All except for Sunday and Monday are named after characters in the Roman pantheon of gods. The radio broadcast, The Voice of Prophecy, supports BibleInfo.com. The program began some 100 years ago when Seventh-day Adventist preacher Harold Marshall Sylvester Richards started broadcasting on a Los Angeles area radio station. So essentially, you have asked a Seventh-day Adventist ministry if Sunday is the seventh day of the week. Let me ask you two questions. 1. What weekday do Jews observe as the seventh day of the week and as their Shabbat? If you answered Saturday, you'd be right. 2. The Christian world will celebrate the resurrection of Jesus just over a week from now on April 1st. What day will that be? And what day do the Gospels say Jesus rose from the dead? They don't say Sunday, they say the first day of the week. The use of Sunday to celebrate the resurrection goes back as far as we have Christian history. When the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, he issued a decree ordering religious observance on the venerable day of the sun. This practice had become common in some Christian circles to help distinguish themselves from the Jews. In other words, anti-Semitism isn't new at all. So, most Sunday-worshiping Christians do so to honor Christ's resurrection from the dead, an event the Bible assures us took place on the first day of the week. I say these things to assure you that we do know which weekday Jesus honored as Sabbath. He lived on earth as a Jew, after all. When he called himself, using the designation Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath, see Mark 2:28, he spoke to Jews about how they observed Shabbat. Jesus often challenged the Jewish religious leaders about how they observed the Sabbath, but never about when. Most importantly, we should consider who we worship every day of the week, not just on the one, quote, holy day. We get to know our Creator.
Like following a list of rules.
Yeah. We get to know our Creator in many ways, one of which is study of His written word, the Bible. May God bless as you make regular Bible study a part of your daily life, sincerely, and so on and so forth. And because I am writing for that website, I don't make explicit certain things that I might say otherwise, such as Paul makes a point of saying that while some person might consider one day to be more important than another man might consider every day alike. And we are not to be getting on each other's cases about what we do or don't believe in that regard. That we are to treat one another and to accept one another in love and be able to agree to disagree if necessary. Now, one other thing, and this was something that happened several weeks ago and I just never got it mentioned. I will use Google to answer all sorts of questions from time to time. And I came up with a question and I asked Google, and Google was not able to answer it. Specifically, I asked, why is the melody for Edelweiss so similar to the melody for More Than You'll Ever Know? And you may be wondering what I'm talking about. And I had remembered so little of it that all I could remember was a certain line out of the chorus of a song that I had noted many years ago was very similar to the melody Edelweiss in The Sound of Music. And I believe that's a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. Uh, I'm pretty sure it was Richard Rodgers who wrote the music. Anyway, I couldn't, it just told me about Edelweiss. It didn't tell me about anything else. So then I put the words of the chorus that I did remember in quotes and searched. Well, then it came up with a YouTube video of a song, and I listened to it, and it was in fact the song I remembered. The song was written by a Phil Johnson. I think that's the name. So I did a search for Phil Johnson and came up with a preacher who is largely in charge of a radio broadcast. And, well, that was possible, but he's pretty close to my age, so that didn't quite seem right. So then I did the search adding singer to it, and I came up with a composer who lived in the Nashville area. And I think that's probably who it was, the Phil Johnson who wrote this song. And as poor as I am at singing, I'm going to sing you the chorus so you'll see what I'm talking about. Christ means more to me than you'll ever know. Christ means more to me than I could possibly show. More, so much more than you'll ever know. Now, if you're familiar with The Sound of Music, then you might recognize the last line of that melody as the melody for the beginning of the song Edelweiss out of The Sound of Music. And again, why are they so similar? Well, probably nobody could give you an answer to that other than it's almost certain that Phil Johnson had heard The Sound of Music at some point in his life. And when he was writing that song, that emotionally powerful melody came to him. He didn't necessarily intentionally misuse the intellectual property of Richard Rodgers. It came to him, and being unable to recall where it came from, he used it. It's a guess. Now, we also mentioned Easter. That's a week from this coming Sunday. A week from tomorrow, we do plan to have a sermon presentation, and it will, my plan is, at least at this point, it will be an Easter-themed topic. So, with all that...
Tomorrow or next week?
Next week.
Okay.
I haven't written it yet. I wouldn't have time to write it between now and tomorrow, so...
I'll write you something.
So, we've wasted an awful lot of time here, and we need to get started on our Bible study. So, let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for the written word. But we thank you also for the living word, your Son. We want to get to know you better. And as we open the written word and we read about your patience in dealing with stubborn, broken humans, we want to be filled with awe at your amazing character of love and be encouraged then to grow in your grace into that image in which you originally created us. Send the Holy Spirit toward that end, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So, as we said at the beginning, get the right thing to click here, we're prepared for Genesis chapter 20. And the subtitle that the translators of this version have given us here is Abraham Deceives Abimelech. Now, this is right after the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the story, the last of the stories were how Lot and his family were saved out of Sodom, how his wife looked back and turned into a pillar of salt, and then what happened between Lot and his daughters.
Oh,
And
that was a question.
how is it possible to get so drunk you don't know what's going on?
No, no. His wife being a pillar of salt. Um, yeah. How literal is that?
I don't know.
Um,
I told that story last week that I had read a bit of somebody's imagination of what might happen, in which they took it very literally. But
how much salt is in the human system anyway?
well, what's the percentage of salt in water to make normal saline? Do you remember?
Oh no.
I think it's in the neighborhood of 1 to 3%, something like that. So it's not a whole lot.
My question, my thought was, if she looked back, metaphorically, not physically, if she was longing for her former lifestyle, then God could possibly have removed his protecting influence, which led her to come face to face with the reality of what she was.
Yeah.
And she got burned up by God's fire. When you are burned up, the ashes that are left are, how much of those ashes are salt?
I don't know.
I don't either. I'm asking. I'm not making any sense, am I?
Well, yeah. Essentially, what we were doing is just setting the stage to get us into what it says here in chapter 20. And verse 1 tells us Abraham moved south to the Negev and lived for a while between Kadesh and Shur. And then he moved on to Gerar. While living there as a foreigner, Abraham introduced his wife, Sarah, by saying, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for Sarah and had her brought to him at his palace. Now, where have we heard this story before?
Was it Isaac that also did that?
Well, yeah, but so did Abraham already. Remember when there was a famine in the land and he went to Egypt?
Yep.
And he told his wife, "Tell Pharaoh and everybody that you're my sister." She was his half sister. So
Again, an incestual family.
yeah. So yeah, he's pulling this same thing again and again, probably out of fear. I mean, it was explicit in Egypt. They'll do terrible things to me to get to you because you're a beautiful woman. So tell them you're my sister. In other words, I don't care what happens to you, just as long as they don't mess with me. Not a very
Failure to love your wife.
yep. And in this case,
Failure to love your sister.
in this case, she actually got taken in to the king's palace. But that night, God came to Abimelech in a dream and told him, "You are a dead man, for that woman you have taken is already married." But Abimelech had not slept with her yet. So he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Didn't Abraham tell me she is my sister?" And she herself said, "Yes, he is my brother." I acted in complete innocence. My hands are clean. Those words sound familiar, but anyway. Um,
Despite my innocence, here I'm paying you off.
let's we'll get to that in a moment. But let's imagine here. How old is Sarah?
Old.
Around 90, 89 or 90, probably. And
Yeah.
yet she was still the object of this man's sexual desire. Of course, people did live longer then, so she probably maintained her appearance for longer than we would expect women to do today. At any rate.
Well, she wasn't beaten down by having to carry on a lot of responsibility. The trials and chores of taking care of oneself, because she had a servant to do that for her.
Well, that may be part of what was going on, yeah. In the dream, God responded, "Yes, I know you are innocent. That's why I kept you from sinning against me, and why I did not let you touch her. Now return the woman to her husband, and he will pray for you, for he is a prophet. Then you will live. But if you don't return her to him, you can be sure that you and all your people will die."
Because he now knows, so he's going to be acting with a guilty conscience.
Yeah,
That's damaging his brain.
yeah.
Damaging the brain, the body keeps the score, so,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it affects the body.
Abimelech got up early the next morning and quickly called all his servants together. When he told them what had happened, his men were terrified. Then Abimelech called for Abraham. "What have you done to us?" he demanded. "What crime have I committed that deserves treatment like this, making me and my kingdom guilty of this great sin? No one should ever do what you have done. Whatever possessed you to do such a thing?" Now, this is highly interpreted translation. Let me read a different one. I think I'll read two different ones to see how it renders that. This is the NIV. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Now out of the New American Standard Bible, which is even more literal. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What have you encountered that you have done this thing?" So clearly Abimelech is, I guess we could use the term irate.
Incensed.
He's not at all happy with Abraham. Abraham replied, "I thought, this is a godless place. They will want my wife and will kill me to get her."
Maybe you shouldn't live there then.
Well, what's going on here? I mean, God spoke to this king in a dream. Was the place really godless? And if not, Why did Abraham think it was? Are we not dealing with a level of cultural and uh, ethnic bias going on here? You're not part of me, so therefore you're godless. Going on. And she really is my sister, for we both have the same father but different mothers. And I married her. When God called me to leave my father's home and to travel from place to place, I told her, do me a favor. Wherever we go, tell the people that I am your brother. Then Abimelech took some of his sheep and goats, cattle, and male and female servants, and he presented them to Abraham. He also returned his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said, look over my land and choose any place where you would like to live. And he said to Sarah, look, I am giving your, quotes, brother 1,000 pieces of silver, or 1,000 shekels of silver, about 25 pounds, or 11.4 kilograms in weight. Yeah, I can see that at the bottom of my screen. You may not be able to, but that's what the footnote there says. In the presence of all these witnesses, this is to compensate you for any wrong I may have done to you. This will settle any claim against me, and your reputation is cleared. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants, so they could have children. For the Lord had caused all the women to be infertile because of what happened with Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Because Abimelech had such a case of the hots for Sarah that he wasn't interested in the other women. And the reason he hadn't already taken her was because she had to go through this however many days of ritualistic lotioning and potioning and
Possibly. Yeah. Not clear what's going on there. I mean, it sounds like it was a one night thing. He gets her to his palace, and that night he has this dream, so he doesn't even touch her. And so the next day he comes out and he confronts Abraham. But then at the end here, we find out that his wife and his female servants were infertile. And that takes a little bit of time to detect. So, yeah, it is kind of curious the way the story's written here.
yeah, Esther had to go through a full year of skin treatments before she was presented to the king.
Yeah. Well, move on then to the next chapter here. Chapter 21, the birth of Isaac. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. She became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened at just the time God had said it would. And Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. And there's a footnote there, which I'm sure is going to tell us that the name Isaac means he laughs. And of course, we already read that earlier when both Abraham and Sarah laughed at God's promise that they would have a son. Now it's taken place. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, probably 2 or 3 years old, Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar, making fun of her son Isaac.
Oh, yet they didn't. I'm sorry, I was asleep. I'm gonna hang up.
Okay. Now, the footnote for that says that that's as in the Greek version and also in the Latin Vulgate. The original Hebrew lacks of her son Isaac. So that was added later, apparently. She just saw them making fun of her. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it." Yeah, that's the language of a Karen. So Sarah was a Karen, huh? "I will not be disrespected like that. I won't have it." Well, ultimately wasn't up to her, but she's asserting something that she wants, and she's using particular language to try to manipulate her husband. This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. But God told Abraham, "Do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too." So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. "I don't want to watch the boy die," she said as she burst into tears. Now there's a footnote there for that measurement of distance. And the Hebrew says a bow shot. So how far could you shoot an arrow? That's a bow shot. That's about how far away she went. And then she sat down. So apparently she got kicked out. Now she's homeless. She doesn't know where to go. And she's just wandering around rather aimlessly. And when they run out of water, she doesn't know where to go to get any. So she sets the boy, who was about 14 at the time, down and goes away because she doesn't want to watch him die. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. "Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there." Now, the angel of God here is possibly Jesus himself speaking to Hagar again, as before when she was beside the well. "Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants." Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt. Well, that's where she was from. Of course, she would go there to find a wife for her son. And at some point, having found the water and having survived this, she does find a place for her and her son to live, and he grows up and then becomes a father. And I'm sure we'll read more about that later on. At this point, the story of Ishmael gets left behind. About this time, Abimelech, remember him, chapter 20, came with Phicol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. God is obviously with you, helping you in everything you do, Abimelech said. Swear to me in God's name that you will never deceive me, my children, or any of my descendants. I have been loyal to you, so now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country where you are living as a foreigner. Abraham replied, Yes, I swear to it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force from Abraham's servants. This is the first I've heard of it, Abimelech answered. I have no idea who is responsible. You have never complained about this before. Abraham then gave some of his sheep, goats, and cattle to Abimelech, and they made a treaty. But Abraham also took 7 additional female lambs and set them off by themselves. Abimelech asked, Why have you set these 7 apart from the others? Abraham replied, Please accept these 7 lambs to show your agreement that I dug this well. Then he named the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because that was where they had sworn the oath. After making their covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God, or El Olam. And Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time. So, in this chapter, we read about Abraham making a covenant, a treaty with Abimelech and his country. And what was Abimelech's country? Well, it says here very specifically that he returned home to the land of the Philistines. You see, if both the descendants of Abraham and the descendants of Abimelech had lived up to this treaty made at Beersheba, there would never have been war between Israel and Philistia. They would have lived in harmony as neighbors forever. As we know from the rest of the Old Testament, they didn't live in harmony. And a lot of the stories of the Israelite heroes are stories of battles with the Philistines. And of course, we have made the point in the past that the name Philistine exists in our day in a corrupted form as Palestine. So even today, the battles between Israel and Palestine should not be taking place because of the agreement, the treaty documented here in Genesis chapter 21. Obviously, these people did not live up to this treaty, 7 female lambs notwithstanding. And the very name of Beersheba, meaning well of the oath, We also came across some other names earlier where Beer, meaning well, Beer Lahai Roy, a well of the God who sees, I think it was what that one meant. Beersheba. So, and Beersheba is, by the way, a place name even today in Israel. So it bears witness to an oath that is not being honored. Anyway, just a few comments on that. It's not being honored by either side. So we're not taking sides. We're just pointing out that there was a treaty made that should have prevented all of this, and because humans are duplicitous, and because they lie, and because they don't hold on to their promises, and well, then we have problems in the world. Chapter 22. My wife is asleep, and I'm sure she would prefer to have been awake for this chapter. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Now, my wife would immediately raise the question, was this really God? And in fact, I saw an advertisement recently promoting a course in the study of Hebrew, that understanding this passage would make more sense if you could read it in the original language. But again, here's the question. Would God really order this, even if he didn't intend the order to be carried out? Or, I mean, we've already read here that this is a test. Right there at the beginning of the chapter, God tested. Well, do we have other places where someone got tested, where their faith was tested? Well, we have the book of Job. Was Job's faith tested? Yeah. Why was Job's faith tested? Why did the test take place? Well, there was an accuser. And the accuser was given permission by God to do certain things that would test Job and see if Job truly honored God unselfishly. And as it turns out, he did. So I'm going to suggest that a very similar scenario may be taking place here. Abraham has had trouble throughout his life demonstrating faith in and confidence in and trust in God's promise. So no doubt the accuser has been busy doing what his name says he does, that is accusing, and has come to God and said, you can't trust Abraham, he doesn't trust you. And so it is entirely possible that in a similar approach, God has said to Satan, okay, I will give you permission to put this man's faith to the test. And God's going to put a limit on it. We'll read that in a moment. But then the form of the test isn't God's idea. It's the destroyer's idea. It's the accuser's idea. At any rate, Abraham gets told to take Isaac and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. "Stay here with the donkey," Abraham told the servants. "The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come right back." Now, some have suggested that this last phrase, "we will come right back," demonstrates Abraham's faith that God's going to do something to get him out of the jam he's in when he says that both I and the boy will come back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," the boy said. "But where's the sheep for the burnt offering?" "God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they had arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Yes," Abraham replied, "here I am." "Don't lay a hand on the boy," the angel said. "Do not hurt him in any way. For now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son." Now again, we have the angel of the Lord, which we believe it's possible that this is Jesus himself who comes. I would point out at this point that very often when you see paintings of this, you see Abraham with a knife in his hand raised up high over Isaac's heart, as if he's going to stab him in the heart in order to kill him. And I have suggested in the past, I think, maybe not on this group, but I have suggested in the past, I don't think that's how Abraham was going to kill Isaac. We know that at least later, when the Jews killed an animal for sacrifice or for food, or both, because usually it was for both, they would slit the jugular vein and let the animal bleed out. That's how they killed the animal. So there wasn't an extremely violent slaughter taking place. Yes, there was violence in that you did have a knife and you did slit, and there was cutting going on, but it was a small deal instead of a big deal. And there are paintings I have seen where they show Abraham doing exactly that, preparing to slit Isaac's throat. Whatever it was, it didn't take place. God stepped in and stopped it. And we've already suggested that this wasn't God's idea. This was something that God allowed. And so he allows then the Old Testament narrative to say it was his doing, when in fact it was the accuser's doing. At any rate, so God stops him. And the other thing that we reach, and this text gets used once in a while, these words, "now I know." And I've told you, I've encountered these people. In fact, I have some relatives who hold that God's knowledge of the future is limited to his knowledge of everything that's going on now and his ability to predict the course of events. But that this text says, since it's God speaking, or the angel of God, these words, "now I know," suggest that until now, God did not know. But if in fact this was a Job-like confrontation in heaven over Abraham's faithfulness, Would not the now I know refer to all the people observing the drama of this earth and the fallen and unfallen angels who are watching these events, and even the accuser who has tried to say that Abraham is not as faithful as you're making him out to be? You're holding him to be righteous because of his faith, but he's not that faithful. Well, now everybody knows. Now the accuser knows. Now the angels who have chosen to follow the accuser know. Now the angels who did not choose to follow the accuser know. Now anybody else in the universe who is able to look on knows that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me your son, even your only son. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yireh, or in the modern parlance, you might hear people say Jehovah Jireh, using J instead of Y there, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. This is what the Lord says. Because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your son, your only son, I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number. The Hebrew is seed there, by the way. You may have noticed the footnote. Like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me. Then they returned to the servants. Remember, he'd left them some distance away, and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. Now, it is generally believed that this mountain of Moriah, on which this event took place, is the mountain at the edge of the city of Jebus, which eventually became Jerusalem once David conquered the city and made it his own capital city, and thus was the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, from whom David bought the land and made it the location for the temple that his son would build. And that belief is held in many circles, such that the people of Islam, who believed that it was Ishmael, not Isaac, who was the subject of this attempted human sacrifice, they hold the place to be holy, and they have built a mosque on that very mountain, and that has made that very much a scene of contention, because the Jews hold it to be holy, the Christians hold it to be the mountain of Moriah, and the Muslims, which currently have control of it, hold it to be a holy site, one of the holier sites in Islam, and so they're not about to give it up, and so we've got this controversy going on, as if somehow there was something special about the location itself. Might I suggest here, as I have before, places are holy because we humans hold them to be holy because we set them aside. We sanctify them. We set them aside for a special use, a special purpose. And we observe certain restrictions on our behavior in order to honor the sacredness of the place. But it's all human. There is no divine blessing to be gained in one location that could not be gained in any other location if we put ourselves in right relationship with our Creator at that location. So the specific location, from a sentimental human perspective, the location is important. But in reality, and from the divine view of things, one place is as good as another. We can worship God anywhere. Soon after this, Abraham heard that Milcah, his brother Nahor's wife, had borne Nahor 8 sons. The oldest was named Uz, the next oldest was Buz, followed by Kemuel, the ancestor of the Arameans, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. In addition to these 8 sons from Milcah, Nahor had 4 other children from his concubine Reumah. Their names were Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. What isn't really clear here is that it appears, and we'll have to go into other chapters to see this, that Isaac and Abraham parted ways after this event, and Isaac began to live on his own. That the event caused a rift between father and son that never fully healed. It's not explicit here, and I'm looking at my clock and saying, while we're not quite up to the usual hour and a half here, I don't see it making sense for us to go on to another chapter. We have done 3 chapters. So at this point, I think we're going to kind of call this quits. Now, notice that Bethuel is mentioned here. Abraham's brother Nahor had a son named Bethuel. Abraham himself had a son named Isaac. So Isaac and Bethuel were cousins. But remember that Isaac was born in Abraham's old age. And so when Bethuel had children, he had Rebekah, but as we're going to find later, he also had a son named Laban. And, well, I'm sure most of you know the story of Laban and all this. Well, my wife and I don't agree on the designation of cousins. First cousins, second cousins, cousins once removed. The way I was taught, the removal, using once or twice removed, indicates generation differences. So in the vernacular that I was taught, Rebekah would have been Isaac's first cousin once removed. Once removed because she is the daughter of Isaac's first cousin, Bethuel. I know other people count that differently, so I'm not going to argue with you. It's just, that's how I learned it. Whatever it is, Rebekah was a close relative to Isaac. Not as close as Sarah was to Abraham, but a close relative. And that's why we suggest that in the story of Lot and his daughters, the idea of such an incestuous relationship may not have been as objectionable in their culture as it would be in our culture today. But at any rate, there it is. We've done these 3 chapters, and we plan to continue on next week, and then that'll be followed by a sermon presentation. At least that's the plan. We're not ever going to say for certain what will happen, but we're going to say what the plan is. And so until next week, when we see you again here, we say goodbye and God bless.